welcome back to the Faith and Culture Show. I am Catherine Camp, your hostess for the show. As you know, this is where we dig in deeply into what is going on in our culture and around our world in order to educate ourselves so that we can have those conversations with others, conversations that count, conversations with an eternal perspective. Well, as many of you know who are, you come back week after week, which thank you so much for that. I am really getting into a different realm than what I'm used to in academia, and that is paganism. When you bring that up in a conversation, people look at you, what? But this is really affecting what we're going through in our world, especially in our Western culture. Well, today I have a real treat. I have Carl Teichrib. He's a researcher, writer, and lecturer focusing on the paradigm shift sweeping the Western world, including the challenges and opportunities faced by Christians. Over the years, he has attended a range of internationally significant political, religious, and social events in his quest to understand the historical and contemporary forces of transformation, including the Parliament of the World's Religion, Burning Man, and the United Nations Millennium Forum. Have you heard of any of those? You may not have, but we're going to learn. Since the mid-1990s, Carl's research has been utilized by numerous authors, media hosts, and documentary producers, pastors, professors, and students, and interested lay people. From 2007 until the end of 2015, he edited a monthly web-based magazine, Forcing Change, documenting and detailing the worldview revolution underway, points of pressure, and forces of change. This is just so important. I'm so glad we have this opportunity to talk with him today. He frequently speaks to church groups in conference settings and occasionally teaches a modular course on secular pagan trends at Miller College of the Bible. Carl embraces an evangelical Christian perspective. He is pro-liberty versus politically imposed equality, pro-individualistic versus consensus collectivism, and he is a pro-free market thinker. So I'd like to welcome him to Carl.
Catherine, it's great to be great. Yeah, thank you. Great to be with you today. This is going to be exciting. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
I am too. Did I pronounce your last name correctly? Teichrib?
Close. Teichrib, like a bow tie and a crib. If you put the two together, you've got it.
Okay, Teichrib. You know, in the Hebrew language, the ch is a sound. So I know that there are different variations out there. Anyhow, wow, what an honor. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being here. Like I said, I have really looked into your work for, you know, at least the last 2 years. And I've been thinking, wow, this is so much information. How does somebody come to want to even look into these things? Because as Christians, we see little pockets and that's our niche and that's what we do. But you're really covering the gamut of what's going on in the world. You even have, you know, you attend these big world religion conferences. People don't understand. This is serious. I mean, this is like the one world religion forming, and they have meetings and they're serious. And it's completely blasphemous to the Christian world, our worldview, period, to the Bible. So go ahead. I'm going to let you talk and tell us your story and how did you get to be where you are today in the way of this is so important. You need to write a huge book like this, which is awesome. We're going to talk about that too. So,
well, okay. Well, thank you, Catherine. You know, interesting question. I'm an accidental researcher. I'm an accidental writer. I never ever envisioned myself doing something like this when I was growing up. I grew up on a grain farm in Manitoba, Canada. And back in the early 1990s, I think it was actually 1990, I was working for a healthcare program in my hometown, a very small community-run healthcare program, and I had to answer to a board of directors. Now, this is a town about 800 people, so this is small stuff.
Village.
But exactly, yes. But all of my directors were either members of the Masonic Lodge, the Eastern Star, the Rebeccas, the Royal Purples, or the Elks. And it seemed as if you wanted to go anywhere in the community in terms of business or on the political side, that's what you needed to tap into. And I was under a lot of pressure. I'm a young man at that point. I'm not a young man anymore, but I was a young man at that point. And there was a lot of pressure to join the Masonic Lodge. And I never did, but Catherine, two of my board members took me out for a supper meeting, grilling me on why I wasn't joining, like what's going on. Finally, one of them said something to me, and it changed the course of my life. And I had this gentleman, he looked at me, and I think it was to avert fears that I didn't have. He looked at me and says, Carl, we're not Satanists. And I'm like, where did this come from? Like I had the thought was never in my mind. It had never once entered into the conversation. I had no clue where that popped out of. And it forced me to go, okay, I need to understand what's going on. Now, I don't have a background in research. I'm not classically educated. I didn't know what to do. So I figured, well, the only thing I could do if I wanted to understand Freemasonry was go to the source. As simple as that. And okay, this is 1990, 1991 now. There's no internet.
There's no internet. I was
right.
just thinking that.
Right. We don't have, we don't have cable television. I didn't even know there was books published on the subject, and there wasn't much at the time. And so the only thing I knew was let's go and dig up their works of history, their philosophers, their rituals, their ceremonies, and dive in it on my own. That's what I did. And then from there, it steamrolled into, because it opened the door very, very quickly, opened the door to what would be considered esoteric or occultic philosophies. And it very quickly opened the door to theosophy, Rosicrucianism. And by the time the mid-90s rolls around, I'm already starting to plug into the political side at what's happening in my own country. And in a way, Catherine, what I did is I went, if my little community is run by this little network, and for the most part, they're good people, they don't even know what they're involved with. But, they just go to the lodge because that's what you do. And I thought, well, if my little town was run like this, could I use that model to see how my province is run, my country is run? And it didn't take long, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, there are similar worldview crossovers. There's intersecting ideas between what I was seeing in the writings of Freemasonry versus even the political side, especially the concepts of universalism, the oneness of religion, that we can all worship the same God, no matter whatever you call this God. There's a sense of religious universalism, even within some of the writings, a hoped for emerging world, international, kind of an international outlook. And so it was at that point that I was like, all right, I got to dig into this some more. Some things happened in my province, some things happened federally, and I started digging into it at a deeper level. I started writing on the issues. Actually, my writing career didn't begin with writing on these subjects. I was writing, I'll back up. As a farm boy, I grew up on motorcycles, dirt bikes, and eventually street bikes. And by I think 1992, 1993, I'm starting to write for motorcycle magazines just as a hobby, just for fun and kicks and giggles kind of thing. But by 1995, I had to make a decision between, do I write for motor journalism? Do I go down that road because I had received a national writing award for what I had done from the motorcycle industry? Or do I pursue this other avenue, trying to understand worldviews and how they intersect, challenge, and we as Christians, how we have to respond to these issues? And we had a death in the family in 1995, and we had to make I had to make a personal decision which way to go. So I decided, yeah, as much as I love writing about motorcycles, as much as I love riding motorcycles, still do, uh, I need to tackle this other side where worldviews collide with the Christian faith, and then how worldviews impact culture, how it impacts politics, how it even impacts economics.
Did you expect that when you first got into it?
No, not even close. It
Yeah.
was just a hobby to try to understand one group. That was it. And then it snowballed. And it
Yeah.
snowballed quickly, Catherine, very, very quickly. I remember, okay, this is like, again, early 1990s. I remember when the 1992 Rio Earth Summit happened, the big United Nations event that gave us the climate change convention, it gave us Agenda 21, it gave us a convention on biological diversity. And already by 1992, 1993, I'm already starting to work through, all right, what does this look like? This worldview, this concept of universalism, how is it being played out? And I remember when all that was starting to come down the pike, and you were like, wow, we're living this out. Doesn't mean that the whole world is Masonic or everybody's a Freemason who's involved in this kind of thinking. Not at all, but it just demonstrated that there's a continuity of thought, a continuity of an idea. And biblically, you could take that to Genesis chapter 3, and then which is where we fall, our sin. And what was the nature or the character of that sin? Well, it was to be as God. Basically, the creation saying, we will be the masters of our own destiny. We
That's
will
right.
turn our back on the author of life, and we will pursue our own order, our own direction. And then the next time you see this kind of coming into play in a significant way, of course, is the Tower of Babel, which is not about just a tower, but it's a city tower construction. They're both there with an intention, a purpose, a goal. And that is this sense of unification, so we can make a name for ourselves, so that we're coming together in our own order, in our own security. We're creating our own kind of our own international system. And so, Catherine, I was looking at all this and going, well, this is just Babel 2.0. And that's where
Yeah.
we're at today, isn't it?
Yeah. It is. And I'm surprised at the Christians. And I don't fault the average Christian. I fault the leaders, the pastors in the churches. They are not pointing this out. Now, some of them are. There's some
Mhm.
really good ones. You all have a fantastic one in Canada. Pastor Artur Pawlowski, he really stands up. He knows. He, he is aware of what's going on. And he's just, hopefully things will back off now.
I hope so
that
too.
you're having a change, hopefully
Hopefully,
to a
yes.
more sane leader or government official who's supposed to be a servant,
Right,
not a tyrannical dictator.
right.
So I really feel for you all. I've been praying,
Thank you.
and thank goodness. We'll see. We'll see what this
Yeah.
brings. But
And
anyway,
Catherine, yeah, Catherine, to your point about my country, Canada, what's interesting with the leadership we have now, which is the Liberal Party, and of course Justin Trudeau just a few weeks ago said he was going to step down. He's resigning, and they have a leadership race happening. But in terms of the worldview that we were just describing, he's living it out. He's prescribing that for my nation.
yeah,
And he was very adamant early on in his administration that Canada is a post-nation nation. In other words, our allegiance is to an international worldview, an international outlook. We're not Canadians. We don't have pride in our country, or a sense of purpose within our country. Our country is only just a brick in the international wall. We're
yeah,
just simply one more piece of this great international work. And he was very clear about taking us down that road, and our policies very much reflected that. So for me, it was little wonder that when we had COVID, we went down the road we did, which was Canada was we took a pretty hard stance, and
yeah.
it was devastating to our communities, to our families, to people individually. And there's still ramifications. We're still going to be paying the reaper on this for a long time.
A long time. And it's interesting because it was very I don't know if in Canada, I know this isn't what we were going to talk about, and we'll get back to that, but people understand. I want people to be able to connect these dots. This is intended. This whole thing was intended. It was an exercise in how far can we go. And I feel like Canadians were aware. I mean, they took a stand one way or the other, but there's a country like Australia where many of them don't even realize that they were under, severe, martial law and totalitarian. It's the same thing, Canada and Australia. I saw police, punching pregnant women, knocking people down, having their scare gear on with their black helmets. It looked just like our Antifa people running around. Gee, I wonder who's dressing them and who's paying for that gear. It's coming out of the same billionaires' pockets, They want to terrorize everyone. But the same kind of thing in both countries. I just don't know how much they don't see in Australia, and how, because of suppression of media, and what people in Canada were aware that was happening. I feel like Canada's a little bit more aware, but I could be totally wrong.
Well, Canada is, and this is, I know this might be a little bit off topic from where you were intending to go, but it's interesting. Canada, we're the second largest landmass on the planet. The only country that's physically bigger is Russia. And yet, I think we're like 82 to 84% urbanized. And so most of our population is wrapped up in 8 primary cities. And we're no longer a rural country. We're no longer a commodity, where we are still a commodity-based country, but our thinking is definitely different than what it would have been even 30 or 40 years ago. And so we really see this almost in many respects as an urban-rural divide, although of course the divide went in every community. It wasn't just simply in rural and urban areas where the divide was there, but certainly we had areas of even my province where there was a special pushback, a real hard pushback. And when my province instituted snitch lines and put enforcement officers in place, that right there was a very deciding factor, at least for myself, going, no, this isn't right. Just flat out, this is not right. You don't put enforcement officers on the street. We literally had people. We had snitches, even in our little villages. We had snitches. You could call the hotline and report your neighbors.
That's
And
what
people
they did
did.
in Nazi Germany. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it was for us. It was a real exercise on. All right, who do you trust? Who in your own community do you trust? Who in your immediate circles are think similarly? And it created a lot of division. That division isn't going to go away overnight. That's for sure.
Yeah. Hard feelings. Well, this is all part of what you were finding out. The Masons, everything playing out on the grand world stage. And so,
right. And
okay.
with COVID, you had certainly an international a mechanism where it seemed that we were all on the same playbook, because we were all on the same playbook. We were all using the same World Health Organization playbook. We were running with the modeling that was given to us by Neil Ferguson and by others. We were operating on those. Every country was operating on very similar data sets and very similar, kind of policy guidelines. And Canada and Australia, we took a pretty hard approach on it. I know your country, I think New York State took a pretty hard approach on it too.
Yeah, California, all of the blue states,
Right.
Michigan, Minnesota. It to me, Carl, it was a nightmare. And it's like that we have lived a nightmare for 4 years here in the United States. And I know other parts of the world too. I really felt threatened. I felt like my life was being threatened on a daily basis. So, I mean, this is all part of the devil's plan, right? And he works through these pagan gods because their spirits never die. So
Right.
this is where we're headed,
Yeah.
everyone watching.
Yeah.
When I let Carl get back on track here.
But to your point, I mean, there's a spiritual dynamic behind all of this. There has to be, simply even from the perspective of we saw, in a way, we took health and we made that into our new Babel. That's what we did. And we were all
Yeah.
going to, it was going to all take us down a certain path. We were all going to be operating underneath a global health regime. That's where it seemed to be taking us. We're still playing around with what that might actually mean as we see WHO agendas and plans move forward. So it's like, okay, and I tell this when I teach my class. I teach a class at Miller College on secular pagan trends. I say, look, this is how it kind of works. Religion, which broadly defined is man's attempt to understand God. Religion affects or influences philosophy. Philosophy is nothing more than man's attempt to try to understand reality. Philosophy informs culture. And culture can include everything from work ethics, family values, education, art. Culture is very broad. And then culture, as it soaks and seeps into the pores of civilization, then it will inform politics. So if you have the top wrong, if you have a religious worldview that says that it's man-centered, not God-centered, it will flavor it all the way through. And at the very end of it, politics itself ends up becoming a type of faith. Even you could look at it, I can look at politics even within that messianic pagan flavor, not necessarily a Wiccan or large P, capital P pagan, but certainly a pagan perspective when you take a look at even the headlines for, let's say, the climate change conferences that happen every year. The language around the headlines are always this: can the climate change conference of the parties, will it save the world? World leaders are coming to save planet Earth. And you have this language all the way through that we're the ones in charge. We're the ones who will save the planet. If we just unify politically, we're the ones who act as Messiah. I've heard this so many times, Catherine. When I was at the Parliament of World Religions in 2018, a whole week, roughly 8,500 religious leaders from every corner of the world, all coming together, along with members of the United Nations, the World Bank, the International Labor Organization. We're all there. They're all there together. And at the end, one of the executives of the Parliament thanked all of us, and he repeated the phrase numerous times. He thanked all of us for the salvation of the earth, that we were the ones saving the earth. And I'm like, no. At that point, we have now placed this within a pagan category. There's no question. Where now we are venerating nature. It's a Romans 1 perspective. We now worship and serve creation. However that may be defined, we worship and serve
Gaia.
creation. Right,
Yeah.
right, yeah, rather than the creator. And that
Mhm.
lands us firmly in the realm of that pagan mindset, that it is man who's in control. It is the creation who is in control.
And that's, of course, the pesky scientists keep getting in the way and saying there is no such thing as global warming or climate change. It's not real. It's all manufactured, and they can prove it scientifically. So I know that sometimes science just gets in the way of world domination. So, anyhow, yeah.
And there's always, there's always issues. There's always problems, and we have to keep in mind that when we think about things like, let's say, world governance, ideas of management, whether it's because of the excuse of climate change, or whatever the reason is, it doesn't mean that those people involved in this are all on the same page. I have watched, and I have a bit of a I guess an insight or inside perspective. I have watched at meetings where everybody is supposed to be on the same page. I'll give you an example. In fact, I write about it in my book. Just have a little excerpt of it. When I was at the United Nations Millennium Forum, there was a workshop on creating a global parliament, literally a Congress for the world.
Unelected officials, right?
Right. And we have the whole room full of people all promoting and anticipating the creation of a world parliament with attached to a world government and what this is going to look like. Oh, Catherine, the moderators, when they were up there, they had their own agenda. Everybody in the room had their own agendas. They all had egos. They all had budget lines. They all had, their own methodologies, their own aspirations. And even though everybody there, with the exception of yours truly, I'm there as a fly on the wall, is basically in agreement with this, the whole thing became it was chaos. Nobody got along with each other because everybody wanted to be king of the mountain. And when it was done, that particular meeting, it was just completely splintered. And it was a good reminder to me that even as the world is pursuing this idea of oneness, we're all going to be together. They don't get along. They don't always get along at all.
Well, those are my prayers, is that, that God would just confound their speech. And frankly, when Satan's involved, they eat themselves.
Yes.
And so it's like sitting back, like you said, you're a fly on the wall, and you witness this happening right before your eyes. How it's going to crumble no matter what. And I think that's what Project Lockstep was all about. Rockefeller Institution put that out there. It's out there still, everybody. Go find it. This document where all the countries have to work in lockstep in order to make this tyrannical dictatorship, one world government work. But you've got those dissenters like Russia, and they're like, no, we're not going to be a part of your nonsense. And the Yamish? No, am I saying it right? The Amish. Sorry, I'm saying it in a dyslexic way. Forgive me. The Amish, when they were questioned, why aren't you doing all this? They said, because we're not participating in that exercise. It's perfect. I'm not participating in this exercise. Y'all go have fun.
That's right.
That's all it is.
Yep. Yeah. Human nature gets in the way. Hey. Yeah.
And that's good. That's
absolutely.
That's great. God knows that. God knows that. So, okay. So you started by discovering I'm just learning about the Freemasons over the last 5 years. And I haven't really delved into it. And so I find that fascinating that you really did a deep dive into this research. And okay, so where did you leave off? So we can pick up where.
Sure, no problem. So by the mid 1990s, I was diving into these topics, and then also exploring the political side as well. In fact, in 1995, the Canadian federal government issued a policy paper, and it was our official foreign policy for 1995 that we as a nation would be pursuing the idea of giving the United Nations Secretary General his own military force, giving the United Nations its own police apparatus, its own infrastructure, its own intelligence apparatus, and that we would have to have some type of global taxation system to pay for it all. That was my country's official position in 1995. I have the documentation for it. In fact, again, this goes back to even how do you engage in research? Well, okay, this is 1995. I was on the web very early on, and I think sometime in early 1994, I got onto the internet. I was a very early adopter, but still I couldn't find the data on this particular idea or this particular project. And I only read about it in a newspaper column. And so again, not having the background in how to do research, I did what made sense. I found the telephone number for the Department of it was called back then the Department of External Affairs. I picked up the phone. I made a phone call. And I said, can I have a copy of the document? How much? Oh, it's free. Fantastic. Could I have a couple of copies, 3 copies? Sure. Here you go. And voila, it's in the mail. That's research. Just literally asking for the documentation. Number one, first of all, of course, knowing the documentation, knowing what's available, and then
Right.
I pursued it. Oh, I wanted to know what was this about, and that year, 1995, especially, really forced me to look at the issues of global governance. Of course, we had the Commission on Global Governance that issued its great big report, Our Global Neighborhood, right around that same time period, and so I was starting to write on these issues as well. And by, oh golly, I think it was 1995, the fall of 1995. I met an American-based author by the name of Gary Kaw, and he had written a book, En Route to Global Occupation. I had met him at a Christian conference. I explained Canada's position. Gary and I remained in contact, and he's an author who dives into global governance, the idea of a new world order, and he tackles it from a Christian point of view. He's one of the few guys who did it like really early on. And
Was he suicided, or what? Did he live?
no, Gary is still around. In fact,
Okay.
yeah. In fact, I still do editing work for him. I still do some contract-based research for him.
Mm.
He's still around. And in 1997, he called me and said, "Hey, would you be willing to move to the U.S., you and your family, down to Indiana, and help me write my book, entitled The New World Religion?" And so we did.
Mm.
And we were in Indiana from 97 to 2001. And then issues came up with visas, American visas. It's not as simple and as straightforward as people may realize. And so
Mm-hmm.
after dealing with a lot of red tape, we just finally said, hang it, we will be moving back to Canada and we will engage in this as a freelancer full
Right.
time. And that's what I've been doing ever since. So I still help Gary Kaw a little bit doing research, but I do that also with a broad base of other authors, researchers, Christian organizations, wherever I can find a way of plugging in and helping other authors and other researchers, I'll look to do that. And then, of course, my book came out in 2018. Before
Mm-hmm.
that, I was the editor of an online magazine called Forcing Change, which looked at the forces of change. And I stepped away from that in 2015, simply because I couldn't continue on a monthly publication plus write a book, especially at the magnitude of the book that it ended up becoming. It was just no way I could do both. And so, yeah, it's a big book. It's a very big book.
Yes.
And yeah, so I hung up the website. I hung up my magazine, but you can go to forcingchange.org and you can sign up, use your email address, and you have access to all 9 years of the back issues. Even though it's dated material, Catherine, it is absolutely still on point. It certainly gives a context for where we're at today.
Yeah.
And I simply tell people, hey, it's free and there's no charge for it. It's free. So strip the whole website of everything. Strip it of all the articles, all the back issues, all the reports that are on it. Put it on a hard drive, keep a copy of it, and because it is a rich resource, and it's available for anybody who wants to access it.
I think that there should be small groups, church small groups, that actually use this material, because we're warned about this in the book of Revelation.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think people understand what it's going to look like. You know, we always think, oh, it's going to be over there, all this Armageddon, this persecution. No, it's going to be here too.
Right.
I don't think a lot of people realize how close we were until November 5th, 2024. As American citizens, many millions still don't realize how close we were to full-on Marxism, totalitarian, buying into the world system, this global governance, like you talk about, with their own military force. How terrifying is that? So you kind of stumbled into this
Mm-hmm.
to humanize. Obviously, I see it as God was leading you
Mm-hmm.
and letting this door open for you because he knew that you are curious and you would actually do the work to find out, because some people might have brushed it off. They might have acted weird. I don't know how you responded to these people, these Masons in your village. I want to call it a village because it's so cute. I mean, 800 people. How awesome. It's hard to steal a car because everybody will know. So that's
Everybody
Carl's
does.
car.
Everybody does.
It's wonderful. We really are missing that in our world today. It's like knowing our neighbors. It's really special.
Yep.
So, okay. Okay, where do you want to go from here? You really started finding out, wow, you opened that door to Freemasonry, and then it got
Correct.
into this one world government, and then what led up to the Game of Gods. I
Well,
just,
yeah,
everything you say here, and let me read the subtitle: The
sure.
Temple of Man in the Age of Enchantment. And
Yes.
so I think that's just so telling what we're going through.
Right. Well, I knew at some point I had to write a book. That had been in my mind for a long time. I'd helped other authors work through their materials. I've helped other authors, in terms of fact checking, doing the research for them, and that's great. That's all about behind the scenes kind of stuff, and I've enjoyed it. I enjoyed it immensely. Nevertheless, I knew that at some point I would have to also write my own book. And so I was playing with it before 2015, just off and on. What would this kind of look like? I knew it would have to be an evergreen book. I couldn't be writing about something that would, be of relevance for 6 months and then have really no lasting impact and no lasting relevance. It has to have relevance literally for decades. Um, and so it's written with that in mind. So that said, it's more historical than anything else, as it helps you to walk through the historical context of how we arrived at this point today. And honestly, Catherine, it just touches the surface. It's a big book. It's over 500 pages, but I had to
Mhm.
I chopped out at least 200 pages from the book, um,
Wow.
because it was just, it was too much already, just getting too big. This is one of my regrets. I chopped out on the section I did on global governance. I chopped out the pages I had done on the World Economic Forum. And
Mm.
this is back before most people had even heard of the World Economic Forum.
They
But
had no idea.
right,
Yeah.
but I had that in my crosshairs for years and years and years. But the chapter I did on global governance, because I tackled it from the perspective of the United Nations, working with another group called the World Federalist Movement, a group that I had spent time going to their meetings. The World Federalist Movement is the longest running pro-world government lobby group, working with the United Nations, working with the U.S. State Department, working with the European Union to try to push
Mm.
for a one world order. And they've been doing this since the 1940s. And so this organization still exists. It has clout. It has national representation. It has a national body in your country. It has a national body in my country and in different parts of the world. And so my chapter on world order really dovetailed a lot with what was happening with the World Federalist Movement, but not the World Economic Order, or pardon me, the World Economic Forum. And then they couldn't really bridge very well without the book all of a sudden taking on a way larger page count and being far more complex than what it was. So I chopped the section out on the World Economic Forum, to my shame, because when COVID hit, everybody
Mhm.
was like, World Economic Forum,
Yep.
what's all this about?
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, I was already well in the know a long time ago. It's just that, that's just how the cookie crumbles sometimes. So that,
Reducing population. Yeah, but when you were first writing this and talking about it, people probably thought you were nuts.
There's still people
Like,
who think I'm nuts.
like a
Oh, yes.
conspiracy, right? The three-letter
Yep.
agency's term, conspiracy theory, when actually it's a huge conspiracy to
Right.
decrease the population and have world governance.
It's actually, I look at it a little bit different than a conspiracy. I look at it as a business. It's the biggest business on the planet, the business of government, and the
Yeah.
business of government working in lockstep within the banking community, the international business community, all with very specific worldviews, with very
Mm,
specific perspectives, and working for certain action items and agendas. That's why the importance of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. They act as a framework for everybody now to be on the same page. Doesn't matter if you're in the banking community, a non-governmental organization, a faith-based community. You're all working for this, these similar outcomes. And
mhm.
uh, and so it's not necessarily a conspiracy. It's very out in the open. I have the documentation, literally, like mountains of it. And it was not difficult to get for the most part. There's some stuff, yeah, it can be a little bit more difficult to find, but for the most part, it's fairly open source.
Right
And
now.
it's not from secondhand sources. It's from primary sources.
Yeah.
And you're like, you're waving it, going, hey, look at this, check it out, and people are like, don't bother me, I'm not interested. um did you see the football game? Did you watch the
Yeah.
hockey game? you know
Mhm.
it's like, oh my goodness, distractions. The real game has been going on since Genesis 3. As mankind says, we will be as gods. And then we've tried to live that out politically. We've tried to live that out religiously. We try to live that out individually in the New Age movement. And the game that's being played in terms of global governance is a large business operation. It's not that it's a way of doing business. It is its own industry. Government becomes its own industry. The industry of the international community operates in a way that is very much like almost like a multi-level kind of a business model, where you have top tier entities, and then after that, a whole slew of national and other international organizations that follow suit, many of them playing by the same rule books. So it's interesting. Just a little over a week ago, I was at a community program on the western side of our province, a little village. It's a village, little village where we had about 300 to 400 farmers come together to talk about the development of wildlife corridors that would probably mean expropriating their land to create these wildlife corridors so that certain Canadian agencies could meet their 30 by 30 United Nations 30 by 30 agenda. The 30 by 30 is that we have 30% of land locked up by 2030 for wildlife preservation, for ecological preservation. And that means taking out farmland, taking that out of commission as well. So it was interesting. A week ago, I'm at a meeting of farmers they're angry, they're upset, and understandably so, because all of a
Mhm.
sudden we have, at a local level, at the municipal level, agreements being made to create corridors to lock up land that has ultimately, where it came from was not at the local level. It wasn't even at the provincial, or in your case, the state level. It was at the federal level, and it was the federal level following the recommendations at the international level. So you can see this domino effect. Here's the 3030 agenda put out by the United Nations. Canada signs on. We ratify the Sustainable Development Goals. Now we have to live by these new rules. We look to implement these in policy. There's a feedback mechanism. Your country does this as well. There's a feedback mechanism. We send reports to the UN to say, this is how much we have accomplished this year in terms of following and implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. And then it gets pushed to the provincial, or in your case, the state level. And then they push your counties, they push the municipalities. And all of a sudden you have a group of 300 farmers going, what happened? How come my land's now under threat
Yeah.
for some nebulous goal orchestrated out of the glass tower in New York City? Like, hello, the rubber does hit the road eventually.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things I think, Catherine, with even the Canadian convoy, it was like, Canada's following an international playbook, and it's impacting us at the personal level, the local level, and we don't
Mm-hmm.
like it. We're done.
Mm-hmm.
So it's. I have people who say, yeah, it's crazy, it's all conspiracy, and yet at the same time, I'm going, well, yeah, not when your land's under threat. Not
Yeah.
when you're not when you see the policies being played out. Hey, in my country, I pay a carbon tax. Um, when I fill up at the gas station, I am paying a tax, which is, and I know the process. I know the thinking because I've been to enough international events. My goodness, even back at the Millennium Forum when I attended, we were talking about putting in a carbon tax way
Mm-hmm.
before Justin Trudeau ever entered the scene. And so it wasn't his idea. It was an idea that was developed at a higher level and then just implemented federally, then implemented, you know, provincially, then implemented locally. So I pay a carbon tax, which means I now pay a tithe and offering to Gaia. That's essentially what it means, because
Yes.
that's really about saving Mother Earth. That's the justification for this.
I'm so glad you said justification because it's not really. Like you
No,
said, this is
no,
big business and it's going to line their pockets even
yeah,
more and to take land away from people who have worked the land, who have owned it, who have inherited it, and they continue to respect it. And it's like, why are you taking farmland? And that's happening everywhere. They're doing that across England. They're doing this in Europe. They're doing this. They're trying to edge their way into the United States for doing it.
hmm,
And when people push back, they have an accidental train accident with chemicals that are going to fall and explode and create this, very highly toxic explosion. And there's no excuse for it. It's like the train company doesn't even hold themselves accountable, carrying chemicals that weren't supposed to be on the same train anyway. I don't know if you know, I'm talking about East Palestine,
hmm,
and then, or they have a big fire in Maui, or they have fires in the wine country of California, and now they're working their way down the state so that they can reclaim it. Or these weather modification machines make a hurricane that stalls right over a huge area of North Carolina, and then they don't help them.
hmm.
you know so yeah, this is serious. These people are ruthless and they want to line their pockets. I like the way you put that. You're right. It's more than a conspiracy. It is big business, and that's the
Yeah,
way they see it.
yeah,
Did I say anything out
absolutely.
of line? Because
No,
you're the one, the professional here.
no.
I
I'm just listening. Just listening.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. No, but okay. So there is they will do things to justify. And again, I look at this. I don't look at it from the perspective of let's say an example using the fires. I don't know. I don't follow all that too much. I'm looking at it more from that policy perspective.
Mm-hmm.
From the angle of the implementing policies, implementing regulations, but then what is the thinking behind it, and how does that match either match a biblical worldview, either in the positive or negative, and
Mm-hmm.
over again. And it's always in the negative, unfortunately. That's what it seems to be. It's We are literally living out that Romans 1 angle where we worship and serve creation. And what's really interesting, Catherine, with that passage in Romans chapter 1, I don't know if you've had a chance to read it lately, but Romans chapter 1, Paul is saying, hey, even though they like to retain God in their mind, they've been given
Mm-hmm.
over to foolishness, professing to be wise. They're fools. I'm going, that's kind of where we're at today, isn't it? Professing to be wise, we've become fools, and we change the glory of God for the corrupted creation. We
Yeah.
don't honor the Creator; we honor creation instead. And again, if your religion is wrong, if your religious perspective is wrong, your philosophy is going to be wrong. If your philosophy is wrong, your culture is going to end up going off kilter, and then your politics will follow suit. Hello, that's where we're at today. So in terms of all of a sudden, let's say the fires, however they happened, whether it's just because of a natural cycle with a dry season, or somebody hired some crackheads to go around with pails of gasoline in a match, whatever
Mhm.
whatever happened, however it all laid out, all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, you've got, well, in the case of the Los Angeles, you've got insurance companies that probably won't want to pay up, or that there will be a battle over it. And then all of a sudden, I don't know, maybe I'm just guessing here, but maybe there's some new green space created, or some a new development. There's always, let me put it this way. How did Hillary Clinton say it? Uh, when oh, it just slips my mind, my tongue. I'm so sorry. It's just there.
It'll come to
Conflict
you.
and opportunity. Yes. Crisis equals opportunity. There we go.
Oh yeah.
As simple as that. Crisis equals opportunity. So, oftentimes it's whether it has been orchestrated or whether it's not orchestrated, whether it's accidental. Regardless which way it goes, it opens up now an avenue for opportunity. And so I look at even COVID, that opened up opportunity. Was it orchestrated? Was it natural? It's almost a moot point, because it ended up being, the crisis ended up being, it became that opportunity. And so I will often try to say, okay, folks, the events happened, whatever that is, there it is. Now, what's going to come out of it? What's the direction that this is going to take? So I'm wondering, even let's say on the side of America's push now for tariffs, and for going down certain, taking different economic route, which I appreciate the fact that Trump is his focus is on your country, as it should be. My prime minister should have his focus on my country.
Yes.
but he
Yes,
but
you
he
should.
doesn't. He
Right.
doesn't. But then, okay, what are the consequences? What are the pushbacks? What are the unintended consequences? How will it open up an opportunity? A crisis will maybe open up another opportunity somewhere else. Russia, China, India, Brazil, South Africa, the BRICS nations, which has
Mhm.
a large population base. They're looking to create their own international system. How will
Yeah.
that all of a sudden rub hard against Trump's vision?
Right.
All of this is, we're living in interesting times, Catherine, aren't we?
Yes, and the people who don't see it, who just want to shut their eyes or put their head in the sand, you're missing it,
Right.
right? They're missing it. This is incredible. And this is a time where Christians can really shine and
Mm-hmm.
show people, hey, this is biblical. This is absolutely biblical. We have this group of multi-billionaires who can own their own military, who can enforce their own military. And the only thing that keeps them from doing so, having this one world government, is the people who are pushing back for sovereignty. Our rights come from God,
Right.
not a state government, not a country government, not a world government. They come from God, and we cannot lose sight of that. And I love, you started getting into the response to people. If you brought things up, they would talk about, hey, how wasn't the game great? Hey, that's part of the enchantment.
Yes.
It's all of these distractions, the movies. And we know that the movies that program us to think a certain way, that's been proven. I think most people realize that. I hope they do. That they pre-program us, and so when it actually happens, we're thinking, oh, I've seen that kind of stuff before, and so it puts them back to sleep. But you'd rather talk about the game, you'd rather talk about something entertaining, whatever your children are into at the time, what's on at the movies.
Right. Right. Yes, exactly. Yeah. But we're kind of, we'd rather, how do I put this? We would rather jump into superficial, surface level conversations.
Mm.
Our bread in our circuses. Give us our games and give us, give us the movies, feed us, make us comfortable, then deal with hard questions and hard issues, because those harder points and what we have been describing demands then some responsibility. It demands some response. It means you can no longer be a spectator. It means that you have to now engage because you have a level of responsibility with the information that you have. And we do. When you have this information, there is a level of responsibility. One of the things that I see that comes up, and it's a reaction to it in the Christian community in the wrong way, is that we become fearful.
Yes.
No, we can't become fearful. We can't allow it to be fearful. There's lots of things in this world that is fearful. A lot of things in life that are concerning, and I'm definitely concerned about these things. There's no question. But at the end of the day, we do know simply the one who is in charge. We know who the creator is. We know that God himself is the one who institutes his will, and that this is moving towards something that he himself will step in and intervene. And at the same time, our fear should not be regarding what man does. That's not where our fear should be. And so I want people to know about this, not that to scare them. Although if it scares you a little bit to go, okay, I need to look into this deeper so I can get a handle on it. Great, I guess at that level. But
Yeah,
I don't want people to be paralyzed by this, Catherine. I don't want people to go,
exactly.
oh, like a deer in the headlights. No. But take responsibility. And one of the reasons that it's important not to allow fear to rule us is even for the perspective of helping others. With COVID, I had so many people contact me and go, okay, can I have a conversation with you? Can we talk? Yeah, absolutely. You want to be able to now engage with them, to lift them up, to give them knowledge, to give them tools, to help them see things a little bit differently so they can start to think through, start to process on an individual level, because that's all we are. That's all we can do is tackle it from that individual level. How now will I set myself up? What do I do? How do I protect my family? How do I protect my assets? How do I operate knowing that the culture around me is hostile to the biblical message? How do we begin to work through this? So all of these big questions, these response questions, are an important part of taking a look at issues like global governance, because it's there. We can't run away from it. We can't hide from
Nope,
it.
that's
How
right.
now do we respond? Not react, respond. When I teach my class at Miller, in the very beginning of the week, I have an essay for them to do. It's actually, pardon me, it's an assignment, not an essay. They do have an essay at the end of the week. But the assignment is I give them a list of 10 videos that they can find online. Basically just YouTube videos. And they're stupid videos. They are over the top. Either they're pagan or they are very extreme leftists in their orientation, and they're very, very over the top. And I tell my class, before the evening's done, after we've had our very first class, when the evening's done, or by the next day at the latest, take some time, pick one of those videos, watch it, write a 2-paragraph reaction, because we're really good at reacting, not good at responding. We're good at reacting. And react. Get on your keyboard, hammer at it the way you would hammer at somebody on a social media post that you disagree with, because that's how we are now. Social media has trained us that way. That's how we all operate. We all sit there and go, bleh, and we just pile on the person. So I'm going to get that out of your system. React to it. At the end of the week, as we've fleshed through these worldviews, as we've fleshed through these agendas, as we've fleshed through the biblical response, as we've looked to understand the biblical context, as we look at paganism, as we look at secularism, as we look at transhumanism, all of these different interlocking points, go back at the end of the week, rewatch that same video, and now respond. Respond with knowledge, not emotion. Respond with an understanding of what you've just watched and how you can bring a biblical reason into this. Bring logic, bring scripture, have a response that is grounded in fact and is something that is solid. And it's a fun exercise. And I think we all need to do exercises like that sometimes, because it's so easy to look at, all right, the World Economic Forum is doing this. And then we get online and we just pound at the keyboard, and we're pounding our reactions to the choir.
Mm-hmm.
But we should be able to go, okay, hi, Mr. Senator. Hi, Mr. Congressman. Hi, Town Mayor. Hey, to whoever we are engaged with, this is what's happening. Here's a leveled response as we have worked through what this means at a local, state, provincial, and federal level. And we needed, again, that's the point of actually being responsible for the information, moving forward in a way where we can act it in a way that's constructive, bring a constructive criticism and demonstrate not just the problem with it, but demonstrate there's also solutions too. And solutions lie in issues of liberty, free enterprise, private property, the importance of the family. From a Christian point of view, the biblical understanding, and this is so relevant, of where our hope ultimately lies. When we go to Burning Man, we have a little team that goes to Burning Man, and we've done this now for 5 years. Burning Man is kind of like a combination of Mardi Gras and the World Economic Forum mashed into one. It's the best way of describing it, Catherine. At one level, you'll be walking down the dusty street, and there's some 70-year-old guy naked as a jaybird walking around, and it's stupidness. And then you go 100 yards the other direction, and you end up in a camp with Silicon Valley's elites, with people from the World Bank, with people from the European Union, having conversations about everything from cryptocurrency to instituting issues around global governance. One of the workshops we were at this year was on giving nature the same legal rights as human rights.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
Yeah, and it's a real movement. It's a global movement. And so we're listening to one of the main advocates for this. And so how do you respond? You've got to find ways to respond. And we look to do that when we are actually in the midst. And Burning Man isn't just simply for the research. We're there also for the outreach. And it's important for us to be able to go beyond just, here's the information. But now, how do we now use this information in a way, leverage it in a way to bring a message of truth forward?
And I think the more people that we connect with in our local atmospheres and then move outward slowly, like you said, we're set up a little bit differently, and we educate people. This giving creation rights, like a human rights. But I mean, where else do you go when you're a pagan and you don't believe in God? You're going to place the importance somewhere. And but the looking at it logically, something like that to me immediately sounds like this is a land grab, because somebody's going to own that piece of property.
Right.
Are you going to just hand it over to them? Or are you going to hang on and make a reasonable, critically thought out argument for, that's just crazy. That's what forests are for. And I can understand setting up communities not to overbuild, not to overtax our resources. I don't want industry coming into where I live. I live in the country for a reason. And so I want to keep it that way. So I want to put people in the city council that value our land and keep it this way, keep the birds here and that wildlife. So there is I like your exercise in, first get it off your chest and then come back and think about this critically and do some research and then respond. But don't just sit there on the sofa and pretend that it's going to go away.
Right.
Because that's going to make them more powerful. And that's what has happened. they've become more powerful because we're just kind of like, oh, they're not that important. Oh, whoa, they're marching forward. So
Yeah, absolutely. And Catherine, this is why doing a podcast like what you're doing is so important, to get the word out, to get the information out, to have people begin to wrestle with these ideas. And don't take my word for it. Don't just simply, listen to the program and go, oh yeah, I agree, I agree. Check it out. Wrestle with it.
mhm.
Do the homework. If you have a copy of my book, I have 1,800 footnotes. A lot of them are explanatory footnotes, but a lot of them are added resources and materials. Double check it. I remember when my book first came out, I think it was in 2019, I had an email sent from some fellow going, I'm sitting with a copy of your book, and my laptop is open. I am meticulously digging through every one of your footnotes. I mean, that's super nerdy stuff. But at the same time, I'm going, awesome,
Yes,
do it, test
yes,
it, test what you're
yes.
hearing. But if you don't have a program like this, Catherine, if we don't have places for these kinds of conversations to take place, then when all of a sudden we do have these issues, landing in our backyard, we find ourselves all of a sudden at a loss. We don't even know how it arrived the way it did. And I've heard this so often when somebody asks, well, how did we get here? Like, how do we get to this point? Um,
Mhm.
hello. None of this has happened out of a vacuum.
No,
There are reasons. There are reasons for this, and so let's have these conversations.
yeah, and they're not hiding it. They may have at one time, but like you
Right.
said, you go to the United Nations, anytime, go look at their agendas, Agenda 2030, Agenda 2050. They have earmarks, and they're trying, their goals are to reach those. And anytime you see sustainable, that means you and me are going to have to give something up
Hmm.
to help them reach their goals, not humanity's goals, but they will pose it in language that makes it look, oh, this is good for everyone. That's why I really like on your website, that the collectivism.
Mm,
People need to understand that means you give up your freedoms for whatever the gods that they're setting themselves up to be,
right.
as they will make those decisions
Right.
for you. You don't have a choice. We
Right.
have a choice right now.
Absolutely. And to your point about, and you made a really interesting point, a good point about giving nature human rights. Who's going to own the land? Who's going to have management over the land? Who ultimately benefits? Because it's probably not the local person who benefits, probably not the landowner who benefits. I guarantee you the lawyers are going to benefit big time. And whatever agencies and non-governmental groups are out there pushing that agenda, they'll likely benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in fact, there's some environmental groups that have massive land holdings, primarily because of the push that they have made for protected zones, ecological zones. Uh, all of a sudden, yeah, the little guy realizes, yeah, you don't actually have a voice. You've been pushed out. And
And you will be pushed out. And then that's when they can have their little 15-minute cities.
mm,
You will be pushed out of your beautiful sanctuaries and pushed into 15-minute cities where they can track and trace you, to make
yeah,
sure that you don't get out of line, drink too much water, breathe too much air.
yep, travel too far, use too much gasoline.
Mm-hmm.
Yep,
Yeah,
I know.
yeah.
Very, very
Well,
interesting.
yeah. So I am just, I could talk and let you, just ask you questions and listen to you forever. But you're going to come back after
Yes,
you go to this big conference in late March. Is that right?
that's correct. Yes. Yeah, it'd be my
Okay.
fourth, I think my fourth time to this particular pagan event. I've been to other pagan events as well, but this one's fairly close. It's only a 10-hour drive away from me, so it's quite accessible. And I'm looking forward to give you some bit of a background, what this is about, and what kind of conversations they have.
Trust me. I mean, uh, if something has sparked your interest, and I'm talking to my audience, that in this conversation. And truly, there are pagan conferences, and that's what they're called. Look it up. This is real. People are serious. This is their thing. And, everyone wants to place themselves in a position of power, like you were saying, even at all these these parliaments that they do. What is it? Their Parliament of World Religions. They can't agree on anything because they all want notoriety for themselves, which we kind of should say, thanks God, you're just letting human nature take its course. And if you don't believe in God, then it is a dog eat dog. It is survival of the fittest. God turns all that upside down. And so go look it up, go attend, go to these things. I know other people who've gone to the Parliament of World Religions and just sat there and listened. These are their plans. And as a Christian, we need to wake people up. I like what you said, Carl, about we have to be there, have to be knowledgeable enough to help people not to run in fear like they did in early 2020.
Right.
And they would do anything, because that's how the mark of the beast is going to get implemented eventually. So we need to wake up and share. Okay, I know you're coming back. Thank you so much for your time. We've gone over, but that's okay. I'm going to split this into a part 1, part 2 for everybody. So if you're wondering, what happened, I got in on part 2. Well, there was a part 1, and I'll list it. I'll list it. Oh, well, thank you so much, Carl. God bless you. And I hope you travel safely to these conferences and the other things that you're doing right now.
Hey, thank you so much, Catherine.
Tell everybody where they can find you, where they can find your work again, and get your book.
Sure. I'm on social media. You can find me on Facebook and on Twitter. And you can find my book at my web page is gameofgods.ca, because it's a Canadian-based website, so it's got the CA ending. So gameofgods.ca. Go to forcingchange.org, sign up so you can get all the information off the website, all the reports, pull it all off, make it yours. And of course, you can find the book on Amazon as well.
Okay. When people go to your social media, is there a special way you're spelling your name? Is there underscore, anything like that?
No, just my name, Carl Teichrib. You can find me on Facebook. I've got a Facebook page. I also have a Forcing Change Facebook page. I don't use that as much. My Facebook page is lots of personal stuff on there too. It's just me. That's what it is. A little bit like that too on my Twitter page. But I'd let people get to know who I am as well. I bring them into my little world out in the middle of nowhere on the Canadian prairies.
And we can learn so much. Thank you for all your hard work.
Hey, thank you so much, Catherine.
God bless you.
Thank you.